Hey, good evening, Erev Tov, everyone. So last night, we mentioned the idea at the beginning of this week's parasha, that HaMishpatim asher tasim lifneihem velo lifnei ha'akum. You have two Jews have a case, have a litigation, a claim, one against the other. You have to go to Beit Din and not to go to a secular court. I remember when I got married, so the first apartment that we moved into, the contract. There was a line in the contract, we were very excited about this at the time, but in the contract it said if there's any dispute between the renter and the balabayit, it will go to Beit Din. Okay? We're even more excited that we never had to act on it, but it was it was nice to see that it was a from thing. It was said if there's a dispute, we'll go to Beit Din. Anyway, so there's a question, one question which comes up in these response of Eretz Chemda that we're going through. As you know, Eretz Chemda is responsible for Beit Din for Mamonot and other things. So the question which was asked by somebody, I'm not sure where the question came from, but a certain community, a small Jewish community, where there's no Beit Din. Now these questions also can come up. These questions can come up for the parties who are involved in the dispute themselves. It can come up for the lawyer who is asked to represent. It can come up in various forms. So this question was sent in by a lawyer who was asked to represent somebody. In the town where they were, there was no Beit Din. So what do they do? And so ordinarily they would fly in a Beit Din from out of town. When there's a need, they bring in the dayanim and they have the case. The catch was that in this instance, the amount of money that was at stake was less than the cost of lying in the Beit Din. So it wasn't really worth it to do that. Was it necessary? Was it could they go to the secular court, to the civil authorities, or what should they do? Just on the topic of the cost being greater or lower, so it's what's that? Settle. Yeah, that's always a good answer. But so it's something which comes up. Actually, it's in last week's parasha. So mitzvah to talk about it. But we have in Parashat Yitro, we see where Yitro comes along and he suggests to change the judicial system. Right? He says to Moshe Rabbeinu that we're going to go, you aren't going to be able to survive the way this is going. You've got people standing on you, Boker ad Erev, all day. People are coming to you, Navol Tibol, you're going to waste away. You don't have the strength. You can't do this. You've got to start delegating, right? And you have to have Sarei Alafim, Sarei Me'ot, Sarei Chamishim, Sarei Asarot, right? Over thousands, over hundreds, over 50s, over 10s. How is it decided which cases are going to go to who? How is it decided which cases come to Moshe Rabbeinu, which cases go to the other judges? So we see that there's actually a dispute here between Yitro and Moshe in terms of how this would be divided up. I'll get to that in a moment. But if you think about this also, just for a second, how many judges did they need? I mean, what were the people fighting about all the day? They were in the desert, right? They didn't have property, they didn't have land yet, they didn't have houses, they didn't have cars. What was it? All day they're fighting, to the extent that you need up to the point of Sarei Asarot. For every 10 people, you have a judge. You know what that means? For every 10, we know Jews like to argue, right? I mean, you just look outside. But you had, the Sforno says, the beginning of Parashat Devarim, when Moshe Rabbeinu begins to rebuke the people, it's always fascinating to look. You look in the order of things in Sefer Devarim, Mishneh Torah. It does not go in chronological order of the entire Torah. Why are those sections chosen first? Why specifically that? Why is it one of the first things that Moshe Rabbeinu comes and he rebukes the people about was this parasha? This parasha where Yitro suggests that he has these judges, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, okay. He said, okay. And the people said it was good. They also said, okay. So what's the problem? So there are those who say, well, the problem was that, they should, if it was necessary, but they shouldn't have been happy about it. Meaning the fact is beforehand, people would come, could bring their dispute, could come up to come directly to the Gadol Hador, you come directly to Moshe Rabbeinu. Now you have to go to somebody else. Okay, it's necessary. It's not going to work any other way, but fine. But don't be happy about it. But the Sforno says, he says, you see over here, the fact is, you had Sarei Asarot. The fact that every 10 Jews were fighting with each other, they had a dispute. That's ridiculous. What's going on? So that's one point that's very interesting. Also, in terms of what it was actually that they were fighting about. So there's a story that the Chafetz Chaim told. Very, very interesting story. It was told that the Chafetz Chaim, they wanted him to take up the Rabbanut in Radin. So he said no, and then they insisted. He said, I'll take it, I will accept it on 3 conditions. This is the story which I read. He says, condition number 1 is that he said he wouldn't take a salary. He said, condition number 2 is that Merosh in advance, they would be moichel him for anything, anybody who feels they have a claim against him for, something that he said in terms of monetary or physical claim, whatever, they moichel him Merosh. And he said, number 3, that you have to listen to everything I say. You have to listen to every psak. That was the hardest one. You have to listen to every psak that I give. And what happened was, soon after, there was a case. There were 2 Beit Din. They came to the Chafetz Chaim. He gave the psak that, Ploni had to pay our money, whatever it was. And the next day, he didn't listen to the psak. So there and then he gave back the Rabbanut. He said, that's it. Yeah, you haven't fulfilled the condition. I'm not doing it. And I'll explain to you why. It happened to be in the week of Parashat Yitro. So says the Chafetz Chaim like this. He asked the question I just asked. He said, all the people were coming to Moshe Rabbeinu, Boker at Erev, they had all these disputes. They're asking him what they should do. What are they arguing about? They didn't have property. They didn't have possessions, right? They're in the midbar. So he said, what they were arguing about was, right now, they weren't arguing practical cases. They were arguing in limud. They were saying one day in the future, there's going to be a situation, right? We're going to go into Eretz Yisrael, or our children will go into Eretz Yisrael, whatever it is, and there will be property. And they were talking, this one will have this property, and there will be such a case, and that's such a case. Who's right? So Reuven would say, well, I think the din was like this, and Shimon said, I think the din is like this. What's the din like? So they went to Moshe Rabbeinu. So says the Chafetz Chaim, he says, when we have, the Gemara tells us, that when you have a called Dayan shedan din emet lamito nasa shutaf makadosh baruch hu b'maaseh breshit. Dayan who is judging and says din emet, who judges a case, that is, he's like a partner with a Kadosh Baruch Hu in creation. There is siyata d'shmaya. There is a Kadosh Baruch Hu sends kochot, gives to the dayanim, to the poskim, to be able to deal with the questions. But if it's not a real case, that's if there's called Dayan shedan din emet lamito. If he's not actually judging a din, if he's not actually judging a case, the whole thing here was fabricated. The whole thing was just a question. They just want to test each other's knowledge and testing. He said, then there's no siyata d'shmaya. Then he says, navol tibo. Then you're going to become weak. Then you're not going to be able to handle it. Then that's what's going to happen. So says the Chafetz Chaim, that's what happened to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu accepted Yitro's advice. He says, with me, he says, you're not coming to ask the judgment. You didn't have in mind to accept the psak that I was going to give you. And therefore, I don't have the siyata d'shmaya either. And therefore, it's not, I can't do it. I can't handle it also. So he said, I'm not going to accept the Rabbanut. But anyway, going back to our question, so listen to there's a very, very subtle difference. But this is what the Chatam Sofer points this out. So when Yitro says to Moshe Rabbeinu to appoint the judges, he says, right, Sarei Alafim, Sarei Me'ot, Sarei Chamishim, Sarei Asarot, V'shaftu et ha'am b'chol et, and they will judge the people all the time, not just you. And here's how the delegation is going to work. He says, Aya kol hadavar hagadol yaviru elecha, any great matters will come to you. V'kol hadavar hakaton yishpetuhem, and anything small they will judge. Right? And that's how it's divided up. V'hakel me'alecha v'nasu itach, and that's going to relieve the burden of you, that is going to lighten the load, and it's going to be okay. So that is in Pasuk Kaf Bet. And then the Torah continues, tells us the story over there. It says, Yitro says, you do this, you'll be okay, you'll be able to stand, and everything will be fine. Right, and over there, Moshe listened to the voice of his father-in-law, as my father-in-law pointed out to me this week. That's the most important thing we learned from this parasha, right? And then he says, he chooses these judges, right? It's the repetition, so we may not even notice it. But then the Torah says like this: they're going to judge all the people. Right? So what did it say before? Yitro said they'll judge anything kol hadavar gadol. All the large matters will come to you, and all the small matters will go to them. Here it says something different. It says shaftu et ha'am b'chol et hadavar hakasheh Yitro and Moshe. V'chol hadavar hakaton yishputuhem. Anything which is difficult will come to Moshe, and anything which is small will come to you. It will come to them. In other words, said the Khatam Sofer, the difference, and what was the argument between them? Is that Yitro was suggesting, how do you decide what has to go to the top judge and what has to go to the smaller judges? It's in terms of how much money we're talking about. You have a small, there's Gadol, that's Gadol and Katan. You have a small claims court, right? If you're dealing with a much larger matter, that has to go up to the top. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, no, that's not the difference. The distinction, however much money there is, right? Reuven owes Shimon money, or Shimon owes Reuven money. Whatever it is, where we want to avoid Geza, we want to have a proper din. That's the way it has to be. But if it's a more complex case, it's not about small claims court. So you have a simple claims court. I don't know, right? You would have the simpler cases, even if it's a larger amount of money. Let the Sarei Asarot deal with that. Let the Sarei Chamishim, the Sarei Me'ot deal with that. The most complex, the most difficult cases that will come to me. And you see, this is not just about the amount of money. Soloveitchik points out. He says when we have a kinyan kesef, with machloket in the Gemara as to whether kinyan takes place by kesef itself, when you pay money for an object, is that what causes the acquisition, or is it when you do a separate maseh kinyan? You lift up the object, you pull it, you bring it into your property, whatever it is. But according to, and in the cases where we say kinyan kesef does not need to be the entire amount. It can be the smallest amount. It can be a symbolic payment. We do this on Erev Pesach when we do Mechirat Chametz, right? We sell Chametz to the non-Jew. We do all the Maaseh Kinyan that we can possibly think of, because we're not sure if any of them work. But one of the ones that we do is Kinyan of Kesef, right? There's some non-Jew in Abu Ghosh who buys all of the Chametz of Medinat Israel for millions of shekels. He pays a symbolic amount. Obviously, if at the end of the day he wants to take it and he wants to use it, he'd have to pay the rest back. But just paying that small amount, that already is enough to affect the transaction. Okay, so it's not about how much money there is; it's about how difficult the case is. But anyway, so going back to the case we started off with. So what was the problem? He said they could have brought a Beit Din in, but it would have cost more money to bring in the Beit Din than the money that was being disputed. So it seems a little bit trivial. It seems a little bit silly to have to do that. So as we explained yesterday, what is the problem? What is the injunction, so to speak, against going to the secular court? What's the rationale behind it? So one of two reasons. One reason was the fact that we said that is, in a sense, it's theft, right? Because in a sense, you're judging not according to Torah law. The person who's going to be awarded the money is not rightfully being awarded the money, because it has to be according to Torah law. That was one problem. Problem number two is the fact that you are being miyaker shem avodah zarah. You're giving credence, you're giving honor to a court which is not Jewish. So we can get around both of these in such a case. The first one is that if the two Balei Din decide that they agree they're not going to go into Beit Din, they're going to go for arbitration, they're going to go for and let it be allowed by some other, determined by some other factor, then there's no question of theft. If they agree to it, then that would be fine, and then the money would be rightfully awarded. Number two, if there is no Beit Din and it's not possible, so then there's no chashash, there's no concern that you're giving honor to somebody else, because there is no Beit Din. So what was suggested in this case was, there are other ways of getting around it. You could decide you're not going into court, you're going for mediation. That's one possibility. Another possibility was they could do it by video conference. This is something which has become very, very popular over the last few years, as you all know. Right, this can be done in certain instances for Beit Din as well. Obviously, it's preferable to do it you have a case in Beit Din, it's preferable to do it in person, but under certain circumstances that could be allowed. And they said what they suggested in the Tshuva was offer one of those options. Right, this is the lawyer who's representing the person. Said offer one of those options. If the person decides that they agree with that, so then fine. If they decide that they don't want to go for that, well, we said yesterday that one of the exceptions to the case was if somebody's not going to listen to Beit Din, somebody refuses the invitation to come to Beit Din, and there was a difference of opinion, how many times you have to invite, etc. But somebody refuses that, so then you're allowed to go with them to the secular court. So offer the alternatives, and if they don't do that, then certainly the fact that's been offered, coupled with the fact that in this case there was no possibility and there's no Beit Din locally, then that would be okay, and that would be sufficient, and that would be there wouldn't be any transgression in such a way. Rabbi Hanania ben Akasha אומר שהקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות את ישראל, לפיכך בא להם תורה מצוות שנאמר אדוני חפץ זמן צדקו יגדיל תורה וידין.